Morning, guys. We will get started here with our second day of Growing Connections. We'll just kind of do a couple of housekeeping things this morning. So if everyone, when they're entering, can keep their mics off, just to kind of save from background noise. And if anyone has any questions at the end of the presentations, we can unmute ourselves then. We also ask that everyone's name is displayed correctly, so as it would on your pesticide license. So if it says like iPad or iPhone, if you can just change that to your name so we can mark you present for pesticide points. And also you have to be present for the entire duration of the presentation, of each presentation that has pesticide points allotted to it in order to receive those points. And an email will be sent out at the end of the morning session with all of the links to fill out your receipts for your pesticide points. And also, we've been having some problems with the CCA codes, the QR codes. So we will probably just be sending out an email requesting any of the certified crop advisors to let us know who they are, and we'll send them the form that they can actually just fill out and sign themselves, and we'll forward that on. All right, and we'll just get started with a little blurb about us. All right, so we are your team of certified crop advisors. So we've got a great team based in Truro. So we've got quite a few people in Truro and surrounding areas that are available to kind of help you with any of your questions, scoutings, any of that. And we also have a great team in the Valley available for any crop needs or scouting and anything like that. We also have a pretty dedicated salesperson, Terry, to Newfoundland. So he's there quite often. So just in case there are some people that aren't familiar with some of the names of our team. So we have Lana Bent. She's currently on maternity leave, but this is her contact. Allison Bremner, Mal Bent, Nick Yearlink, and then our summer students. We have a pretty good team of summer students that help keep everything moving. All right, so for in the Truro team and surrounding areas, just kind of like the rest of Nova Scotia, Antigonish as well, Cape Breton. So myself and my contact, Donnie McGregor, Luke Fisher, Rebecca Archibald, and Terry Prescott. All right, just a brief overview of kind of some of the products that we offer. So custom granular fertilizer blends is probably the main one that we do based off of your soil results and any tissue results as well. Liquid micronutrients, so any foliar products carry Agri-K as well as Nutrag products. And so water soluble, so for anything kind of going through the drip, or any of those higher end Hort crops, crop protection, so your herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, and seeds. So we carry a fairly wide variety of seeds, so decalp, corn, and bean seed. We also carry Enogen, corn seed, and then Quality Seed is our supplier for forage and cover crop seed. Farm supply is kind of everything in between, so plastic, twine. We also carry a fairly high-end lineup of rat poison. So if you have some bad rat problems, then we probably have something that can help. And then salt in the winter kind of helps keep us going in the winter. And here's just some pictures of our team kind of doing what we do best in the season. So kind of doing trials, sap sampling, all that kind of stuff, field days. All right, and so some services offered. We do sap sampling, so those samples are sent to the Netherlands for to be analyzed. The fruit sampling is actually sent to A&L Labs in Ontario. And we also offer soil sampling that just stays local at the lab in Bible Hill. And so, yeah, and then based off of the results that you receive back from any of these testing, we provide the agronomic advice to kind of help you move forward from there on what you can do based on the results. So pre-season planning is something that we have been doing in the past couple of years just to kind of help give us time to really go over in depth things that we need to do for the upcoming season. So it kind of gives us time to do a deep dive into any of your soil samples from last fall that are updated. Look at your SAP results just to see how did it go last year? What can we do different this year? And then from these two tests, kind of make granular plans, foliar plans, that kind of stuff. See if we missed on any key nutrients at certain points in the season. And it's also really important to look at your crop protection plan. PMRA likes to change the product labels yearly based off of if there are any MRL issues, pre-harvest intervals, re-entry intervals, all those kind of things change fairly regularly. So it's good to make sure that you're on top of that and that you're still kind of in line with all the rules. And it also helps with resistance management so that we're kind of keeping your program a little bit different, changing up the active ingredients that you're applying. And here's just some nice pictures of our trucks delivering product throughout the province. So Rebecca and I kind of handle all of the delivery and that kind of stuff. And I will pass on the third-party financing to Rebecca.
Thanks, Chloe. Good morning, everyone. So just a bit about third-party financing option that we have here through the Agromart. So basically, it's a program that we use through FCC and Scotiabank. They each have a very similar crop input program. So essentially your season purchases, for example, between now and the end of August for 2025, those invoices can go on this loan essentially with either one of these lenders. And you have until February to pay off the Scotiabank loan and the middle of March for the FCC one. So they're similar timelines. They're both financed at a rate of prime plus 2.95. Might be 2.9. I should confirm that, but right around there. So it's just a tool to help with cash flow for you guys as well as us. You can get essentially you're paying your bill here using this loan, and then you have several months to actually pay for those products with the lenders instead of us. So of course it gives us the cash flow, gives you a bit of leniency, getting that bill paid off and giving you a bit more time to actually pay the principal. So just wanted to touch on those. If anyone has any questions at all or interested in learning more, just reach out to me or any one of our team. We can definitely get more information for you and be happy to chat about those options. Of course, here's how you can reach us generally. If you don't have a specific contact for one of our team members, you can always find us at the office number or email address shown there. We do have a new website that launched a couple of years ago, so encourage you to check that out. And we're on social media as well, so you can always kind of keep in the loop to what we're doing there. So if anyone has any questions for our team about what we do, I think it's just Chloe and I here at the moment from our team, but we're happy to answer any questions. We do have a few minutes before we get into the first official speaker of the day. So
Chloe and Truro for having me on. I'm Bethany Muir, Technical Sales Manager for crop nutrition products or for dry fertilizer products in Eastern Canada. I have a counterpart as well that deals with the account management, so the pricing and availability and the logistics flow and everything. He wasn't able to be online today to introduce himself as well. He's in for him, he's in Palm Springs, California right now at a fertilizer convention. So our role is really to support the Truro team in selling and positioning our performance products and our commodity dry fertilizer in Eastern Canada. So we really support Chloe and the team, but I'm really happy to talk directly to you, the users of our products, on how they get used and what the intent of them is. So today I'm just gonna, as briefly as possible, talk about Micro Essentials, which is our phosphate performance fertilizer. At Mosaic, we really promote the value of soil fertility because as much of 60% of the yield depends on having balanced crop nutrition on your fields. So this, of course, involves trying to understand what fertility currently exists in your soils, as well as the crop that you're intending to plant and any intended yield and therefore fertility removal that happens as the plant grows. So today I'm going to focus my conversation on our MicroEssentials product, our performance phosphate product. If you're familiar with this product, you may also know that we have 3 formulations. I'm going to speak today specifically about MicroEssentials SZ, which includes zinc as well, but we do have 2 other formulations of MicroEssentials that does not include the actual zinc, just the nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. So it is a dry fertilizer source that combines 4 nutrients into one, balanced in the granule. It is a superior phosphate source compared to any other commodities or blends because the 4 nutrients are evenly distributed throughout the granule with no large inclusions or coatings of any kind. So the actual formulation is 11.7 nitrogen, 40 phosphorus, 10 sulfur, and as you'll see in some upcoming slides, that 10 sulfur is 50% balanced with sulfate and elemental, and then of course the 1% zinc. So the benefits of using MicroEssentials SZ as your sole phosphate source, if you choose, the 3 benefits are the uniform nutrient distribution that you can get, as I mentioned, with those 4 nutrients for improved balanced crop nutrition. You also get the 2 forms of sulfur in the form of elemental and sulfate, resulting in what would then be a season-long availability of sulfur nutrition and increased nutrient uptake compared to other fertilizer blends. So, and the unique chemistry and precise nutrient ratio of MicroEssentials gives us these 3 benefits. I'll very briefly go over what each means. At the end of the day, higher profits from the extra yield you get from these 3 benefits. So while other fertilizer blends contain the same nutrients, they're often in separate granules, making distribution across the field widely inconsistent. And especially this is true in nutrients applied in small amounts, and those in particular for our conversation today would be the sulfur and the zinc, which end up, if it's in a blend, not necessarily being distributed and accessible to every plant in the field. So more points of contact for the plant mean higher yields and therefore higher profitability. So this is just a pictorial of the MicroEssentials granule under a microscope. And so on the left, you can just see the dense nature of the fertilizer, as well as the 2 color graphs is showing you the distribution of zinc within the granule and distribution of sulfur within the granule, both elemental and sulfate. So you can see there's no large inclusions, as we mentioned, and it's evenly distributed within the granule. So to better understand this, because we can't unfortunately get out into the field, I don't know where you live, but I haven't seen green grass since about late October. We've been covered in snow. So I'm just going to describe essentially what happens with traditional blend with zinc in it compared to MicroEssentials SZ. So especially with a nutrient like zinc. Let's just take a soybean crop, let's say 140,000 plants per acre. On the left half of the screen, you'll see what we have when we have a normal MAP or DAP blend phosphate source, which includes zinc sulfate as the zinc inclusion. And the commonly recommended for these soybeans would be about 5 pounds of broadcast zinc per acre. So once we apply this blend and we have the zinc within this blend at 5 pounds per acre, you end up getting about 4.8, or let's just say 5 granules of this zinc in a square foot, which of course equates to less than 2 per plant per se. But if you focus on the right side of the screen, you'll see that in Microessentials SZ, we have in 150 pounds applied, there's only about 1.5 pounds of zinc that are included in total, but you end up getting at least 52 granules per square foot, and twice as 10 times as many as you would think, and therefore more availability. Every plant would have availability of zinc. So the more interception sites that the zinc can have with the actual plant, compared to the traditional blend, the better uniform distribution you end up receiving. So if we compare, I'll show you at the very end of this a bunch of information that you can get online that's accessible to anybody who's interested. One of our agrifacts describes a zinc rate study within corn. And you can see that no matter the rate of zinc applied in the MAP ammonium sulfate zinc sulfate blend at 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 pounds per acre, you still do not get the bushels per acre yield as even 2 pounds of inclusion within the Microessentials zinc rate. The second benefit of Microessentials is increased nutrient uptake. So Microessentials is specifically formulated to improve nutrient uptake of phosphorus, sulfur, and zinc within a single product. So it's designed to improve the nutrient uptake cycle to be available throughout the growing season. So if a plant is being fed throughout the growing season, higher performance results. So to just highlight the importance of, I think we all know the importance of phosphorus with plants. It's involved in growth and development, photosynthesis, metabolism, as well as creating those sugars within the plant. The points of phosphorus that are in highest concentration are at the growing points within the plant. So the challenge with phosphorus, though, is it moves very slowly in the soil. So it must be in soluble form for the plant to uptake it. And it's largely taken up as an inorganic orthophosphate ion. And this is massively affected by the pH in the soil. So everything ties back to making sure you're understanding the pH of the soil, organic matter, and having this balanced crop nutrition product included. So, and this is because phosphorus easily reacts with soil minerals, so the solubility and thus the plant uptake and ability is challenging. So with Microessentials, the unique chemistry of Microessentials basically creates an acid zone around each granule, therefore lowering the pH. And this promotes the formation of dihydrogen orthophosphate. So we tend to explain this as the better form of orthophosphate, which is more easily taken up by the plant. So this is essentially what increases the uptake and the efficiency of phosphorus uptake with Microessentials. So a way to describe this is basically if you take, this is a corn, uptake in corn of phosphorus, and if you take the total pounds of P2O5 that are required by that plant from emergence basically all the way until harvest, more than 50% of the phosphorus needed is needed in the last half of the growing cycle. So you need to have phosphorus available throughout the vegetative season and accessible to the plant. It's hard to pivot between vegetative and reproductive, especially if there's a lag time. So plants that uptake, and 38% of that is in the last two stages of the growing cycle. So we need to make sure that the plant has access to this better form of orthophosphate throughout the growing season. Another huge trial we did in greenhouse basically just compared MAP and another study, DAP blends, and the increased uptake of phosphorus with microessentials. 20% more phosphorus uptaken compared to MAP alone, and 9% increase in phosphorus over a MAP and ammonium sulfate combination. So if you want to do a deep dive on any of these, at the very end, I'll mention the site where you can access this. So the last benefit is season-long sulfur, and this to me is the best and most loved part of our microessentials product. Sulfur's role in plants is very common: root growth, seed production. It improves the growth by supporting the metabolism of nitrogen, as well as we know, for the formation of amino acids. And sulfur availability is also influenced by the amount of organic matter that's in the soil as well. And it does have a very strong relationship with phosphorus. So these are two studies that basically looked at the uptake of sulfur in corn and in soybeans. And what it shows basically is plants take up nutrients a lot longer than we think during the last 2 or 3 growth stages of development. So when deciding on a fertilizer application, it is really critical that the nutrients contained are available season long for optimal plant growth. And why is this? When I was in public school, we learned a lot about acid rain and the environment. And back in the early 80s and into the 90s, there really wasn't a huge, as large of a need of including sulfur in fertility programs, because it was available within the soil from environmental inclusions. So now, if you let it go all the way to recent years, you'll see that there's hardly any sulfur coming from the atmosphere and being deposited for plants to take up. So the form of sulfur that is taken up by the plants is sulfate. Challenges with sulfate, as we know, are it's highly susceptible to leaching. So plants can only absorb sulfate through their root system, and any form of sulfur in the form of, let's say, elemental sulfur needs to be oxidized with oxygen in order to become plant available as sulfate sulfur. So elemental sulfur is the most concentrated form of sulfur, hence it has a lower transport cost and less of a dilution effect on other nutrients and fertilizers compared to sulfate-based fertilizers. Oxidation of elemental sulfur, therefore, is a very critical step to making this sulfur available to the plant. So a few things just to note on sulfur oxidation, because Microessentials SZ has the two forms. It has sulfate for immediate release, as well as elemental sulfur, 50% and 50%. So the sulfur, elemental sulfur, still needs to oxidize in order to be able to be available to the plant later in the growing season. So on the side, you'll see this electron microscope. The white dots are the elemental sulfur inclusions. And familiar with lots of factors that help sulfur oxidation: the pH of the soil, amount of organic matter, as we talked about, the temperature, soil moisture, and of course, microbial work. But the one that's most important to Microessentials and that affects elemental sulfur oxidation the most is the actual size of the particle. So the unique thing about microessentials, as said, is the elemental sulfur inclusions are extremely small. And the more surface area you have around that elemental sulfur, the better it's going to oxidize and be available for the plant later in the growing season. So we'll just demonstrate this by a graph. So if you can imagine a corn crop that is growing from emergence all the way up to harvest. The plant represents basically the uptake needs of sulfur throughout the growing season. So there's a large uptake early in the growing season for growth and the mid-vegetative stages, and as it continues through the late reproductive stages for fill and grain quality. So sulfate fertilizers represent this light green line, and you can say they're immediately available to the plant, but then unavailable towards the end of the growing season. With the yellow line, you can see the elemental sulfur, which takes time for temperatures and biological activity to increase and often leads to early season deficiencies when elemental sulfur fertilizers are used as the sole fertilizer source. So what microessentials does is provide the two forms of sulfur, the sulfate and co-granulated with the elemental. And that way, every single granule is working to provide season-long sulfur for that plant. Last thing to note before we get into a couple yield and efficiency conversations is that Microessentials SZ is an enhanced efficiency fertilizer. It has that designation because it has at least 50% of the total sulfur as elemental sulfur. So not necessarily as true in Canada, but growers within the United States end up getting eligible for financial and technical assistance because they use this fertilizer in their operation. So I'm not sure at what point, or maybe Chloe can speak to this more than I can directly, because it's considered a sustainable product. It could be something of consideration for your operation. But just a reminder on the three benefits of microessentials: SZ, uniform nutrient distribution, providing increased nutrient uptake, and two forms of sulfur, elemental and sulfate, for season-long availability of sulfur. So ultimately, this is to have the benefit of higher yields and therefore more profit. I'll just use one example from corn that we see. I know we're a lot of vegetable and hort growers on this call. So I do have some preliminary information on this product being used on low bush blueberries. But for corn, basically, instead of a MAP ammonium sulfate zinc sulfate blend, using microessentials as the sole phosphate source ends up giving you approximately 5 bushels per acre more, everything else considered equal. So we've been working with a third-party researcher on low bush blueberries for the last 2 years. So I'll give you some preliminary information that we have not even shared yet, that will eventually become an agri-fact like you see here in corn, and we have some in soybeans, wheat, lots of row crops. But this is the first work that we've done on low bush blueberries. So basically the Mosaic company partnered with a third-party researcher and wanted to compare microessentials and another performance product we have, a potash, which has boron in it, our Aspire product. We wanted to compare these two products used in comparison to a standard fertilizer blend to assess the impact on yields, soil nutrient levels, and any economic returns. So this large third-party 4 sprout year, so 2 locations, 2 years, was conducted in Nova Scotia and PEI. This became a result of some findings that we had from 2021-2022 small plot trials, also conducted by the same third party. And these early trials evaluated, again, microessentials as said, compared to standard fertilizers, and as well as the timing of the application of Aspire, because Aspire can be used in the spring and fall equally for a boron and potash source. So at that time, the results revealed that the highest yielding treatments were both with positive return, was combination of Mez and Aspire applied in the spring of sprout year. So that inspired us to do these large plot over the 2 years. So some challenges, definitely the soil pH in these 2 locations and aluminum toxicity, excuse me, were a challenge, but ultimately nutrient available challenges for the low bush blueberry growers in those areas. So we certainly are continuing to do the research. We recommend longer term 4 to 6 year studies in order to understand the cumulative effects of fertilizer treatments, as well as soil nutrient buildup and plant health over multiple cycles. So in this case, the microessentials combined with Aspire ended up winning over the MAPDAP blends that included zinc, boron, and sulfur. In Nova Scotia, the same wasn't as true in PEI, and the feedback basically goes into a few things. Basically, the year we had lots of moisture in 2024. There was a lower than average berry price, which impacted the ROI calculations. There was irrigation in PEI versus Nova Scotia. So even with the large differences, you know, the benefit was definitely clear in Nova Scotia with the combination of those 2 products. So definitely not as much difference in yield, but when you broke it down into the ROI calculation, there was definitely a benefit to use these 2 products instead of a regular blend in Nova Scotia. So more to come on that, more deep dives and some information that will be publicly available in the near future. This is just a list of all of the types of crops microessentials has been used on and some of the wins in each case. And lastly, I just wanted to bring your attention to our website, cropnutrition.com, where depending on if you grow canola or corn or other types of row crops and specialty crops, we have a multitude of information on our website. So it's very simple, just cropnutrition.com, and you select any of the agrifacts. You can sort by crop, product, apply, and see some of the work that we've been doing, large scale, small scale, in-house and third party. And that was all I had to share. Thank you for your attention. And I'm assuming I went over time, but my apologies in advance. Thank you again, Chloe.
No, that was perfect, Bethany. Yes, you're right on time, so that's all good. All right. Well, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Bethany on any of the products that she mentioned or any of the research? I don't think I saw any in the chat.
If some come up as well, you can certainly take them, and I'd be happy to help you answer them. Always at your service.
Hello, it's great to be with you this morning. As Chloe said, I'm Denis Rodet with FMC. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to share some information with you about FMC and the products that Truro Agromart and their team is selling for the last few years. How's the weather out there, by the way, anyways?
It's been fairly cold. I think we're about to get some snow overnight tonight and tomorrow. So
yeah, same. A storm heading our way, and we've had more snow than ever before, which is kind of interesting and kind of nice, actually.
I don't know if everyone would agree, but
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to be positive when you're outside blowing snow every morning.
yeah.
So FMC has quite a number of products, mainly, not mainly, but we have herbicides and insecticides. We do not really have any fungicides. So I'll just give you a little bit of a quick rundown. So AIM, Express brands, They're mainly used either as a desiccant or a burn down product before planting other crops. The Authority brands, the Command, the Focus, they are herbicides that offer some grassy and broadleaf weeds with residual activity. Then there are the post-emergence, probably used a bunch of those. Things like Barricade, Refine M, so broadleaf weed control in cereals, Spartan for blueberries, and Upbeat if you're happen to be a beet grower. But we have an awful lot of insecticides. We happen to be probably the market leader in Canada when it comes to insecticides. And so I will probably try and focus, for sure we'll focus on the insecticides and try and touch on a couple of those that maybe you haven't used very much or you haven't heard an awful lot about. So the insecticides that I plan on talking most about today are Belief and Verimark. If we have a little bit of time, I'll touch on a couple of others, but those will be the two that I spend most of my time on. So Belief, flucinimide is the active ingredient, and Belief is really all about aphids. Aphids. If you want to control aphids, then Belief is probably something that you would like to look at. So the aphids, they pick up the Belief through their system, or they get it into them either by contact, by walking across it, or ingesting some of the product that is on the plant leaves. So interesting product in that they pick up the Belief and they stop feeding on your plant within 30 minutes. So very quick response. But what happens when they take in the Belief is they become paralyzed. So they can't drink, they can't eat, and it takes them, they basically starve and dehydrate to death. So it takes them a long time to die. But as I say, after the first 30 minutes, they're not eating anymore. They're just having a really tough time because they stay on the leaf. They look like they might be alive, but they're not doing anything. You'll see them on the leaf after they've had Belief. They'll be walking around in circles. They'll have a hard time righting their body. They'll be weaving all over the place. They'll act a bit like a drunken sailor. So that's how you can tell that they've actually been treated. The residual activity with Belief is anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks, depending on environmental conditions, rainfall, that type of thing. And Belief is active on all stages of aphids, so from immature nymphs to right up to the adult stage. A few benefits or features of Belief is that it has translaminar activity. And translaminar activity means that if you put product on top of the leaf surface, it has the ability to travel through the leaf, and you will get product on the bottom side of the leaf. So it doesn't really matter whether the aphid is on top of the leaf or on the bottom of the leaf. There's going to be product there, and you will get control. The little graph on the right shows 24 hours after treatment and 72 hours after treatment, and the top of the leaf and the bottom of the leaf. So even after 3 days, you've got a lot of product that has traveled to the bottom of the leaf, and control is virtually the same. It has what they call xylem systemic activity. And basically what that means, it has the ability, the product Belief has the ability to travel up the plant. And if you're putting it on the leaf, it has the ability to travel to the margins of the plant. So it'll move out It won't move down the plant, but it will move out. And the other nice thing about it is that it's not affected, the efficacy of this product is not affected by high temperatures. So no reduced efficacy, even if temperatures are warm. So there's been, over the past couple of years, there have been many additional label updates and minor use additions to the Belief label. You can now use anywhere from 120 to 200 grams per hectare, which is an increase in rate, and that's 3 apps maximum per year. And the 200 milligram or the 200 grams per hectare rate is on selected crops. So the higher rate, for example, you could use it on cucurbits, so melon, squash, watermelon, if you were trying to target tarnished plant bug. You could also use that rate if you have strawberries and you were trying to control thrips. Really nice thing about Belief, the re-entry period is 12 hours. The pre-harvest interval, it's variable and it depends on the crop, but it's anywhere from 0 days to 30 days. 30 days, the longest is really only on one crop, and that's hops. Belief is also very low risk to pollinators, so bees, and to beneficial insects. So I'll talk a little more about that a little bit later. Also a very environmental profile, so easy on the environment, and very easy on the applicator. Belief is, the actual product is 50% SG. So an SG, that's a soluble granular. If you were to take this product, pour it in water, you would go into solution and you would have a really hard time seeing if there was really anything in there because it forms a true solution. If you look at the label, I said it was environmentally friendly and pretty safe to the user. It has a caution label on it. It's compatible with adjuvants, so oils, and all tank mix partners that have been tested. So lots of variability or lots of flexibility there to tank mix. As I said, it dissolves in the tank completely. There have been no reports of crop injury using Belief, very easy on the crop. Depending on your water, it stays stable anywhere from, a pH of 5 to 9. So that's a huge range of ability to stay stable in your water. Application, you want to ensure that you have a good coverage. You're spraying something on plants that have probably lots of foliage. So you want to get good coverage, but not to the point of runoff. And if you have a lot of dense foliage or you have a really high population, since you want to get good coverage, you want to maybe in those situations add a little more gallons per acre when you're spraying. It's a novel chemistry. It's a group 28 is it's classified as. To date, there have been no reports of resistance. There has been no reports of cross resistance to some of the other insecticides you would use, like organophosphates, carbamates, pyrethroids, or neonics. And because it's a group 29 and there's no resistance, it's a really good tank mix partner to use in your insecticide resistance management or IRM systems. As I said, it's a very low risk to the beneficials and to the predators. So other beetles and bugs that like to eat aphids, things like ladybugs, the minute pirate bug. So very safe on beneficials, very safe on predators. And you want to have those beneficials and those predators, you want to keep them on your crop. You want to have them have their population increase so that they're helping out on your crop. So anything you can do to keep these beneficials and predators alive and increasing in population is a really good thing. So I had said there had been some label updates, and these are some of them. So if you're using belief on tuberous or corm vegetables, you can get now suppression of potato psyllid at 200 grams per acre. Palm fruits, you get suppression of tarnished plant bug at 200 grams per hectare. And stone fruit, again, suppression of tarnished plant bug at 200 grams per hectare. You can increase the rate for stone fruit. You can increase the rate for aphids from 120 to 200. And suppression of tarnished plant bug if you have crops in those categories, and those categories are really green spinach, parsley, cilantro, celery, rhubarb. There also have been some minor use registrations. So if you're growing if you have low growing berries, things like cranberries or strawberries, you can control thrips with that high rate. Also, fruiting vegetables, cucurbits, root vegetables, suppression of tarnished plant bug, that's been added to the label. If you have a greenhouse lettuce, you can use it to control aphids. Potato slips for control of lygus, aphids, and thrips. Outdoor animal, also registered on outdoor ornamentals. So this is what the belief label, some of the crops and some of the rates that are on the label. Really an awful lot of different crops on this label, root vegetables, fruiting vegetables, and the rate is dependent on the crop. But if you look at the very top one, you'll see brassica leafy vegetables. So the pre-harvest interval is 0. The re-entry period is 12. And the rate is anywhere from 0.12 to 0.16 kilograms per hectare. And 3 apps per year would make it 0.48 kilograms per hectare per year. So very low use rate. Re-entry is fairly quickly. And for most of the crops, as I say, it's happens to be a pre-harvest interval of 0. The longest pre-harvest interval on there is hops, which is 31 days. So that's a bit of a lowdown on belief. And most of this stuff is on the label, but if you need any help with that, more than happy to help you. So another product that you probably have heard about but haven't used very often is Verimark. Verimark is a group 28. Its active ingredient is thiazapyr. And it's registered on potatoes in furrow. So for Colorado potato beetle and flea beetles. It does not control potato leaf hoppers. So if you're going to use this as in furrow for potatoes, you need to still be aware of that. It doesn't control leaf hoppers. It's an in-furrow application. It's xylem systemic, so it's picked up by the roots and it travels up through the plant. And that's how it controls the Colorados and the flea beetles. It's not registered as a seed piece treatment, so you need to remember that. In furrow, it's 6.75 to 9 milligrams per 100 meters of row, or 750 to 1,000 milliliters per hectare. And that is if you're using 90 centimeter row spacing. So that's really important. If you're going to narrower rows, it's still the same rate of 6.75 to 9.0 per 100 meters. There's no pre-harvest interval because it's soil applied. And it says there 60 days before foliar group 28 insecticide, not in potatoes. Basically, what that means is that if you're going to use a group 28 in furrow for Colorados and flea beetles, that you can no longer in the season use another group 28 foliarly. So if you use it in furrow, you're done with the group 28s for the year. Verimark, it's a very low risk to pollinators and beneficials, and it also has a very favorable environmental profile. So I think this is where Verimark has really caught on for the last few years. It's been available and one of the few products that you can use in root vegetables, things like radishes, turnips, and it controls flea beetles and cabbage maggot. You've lost the opportunity to use Lorsban, so this has resulted in more Verimark, more growers using Verimark. So the brassica crops, so you're controlling your Lepidoptera, so things like cabbage looper. You also control, or you have early season activity on flea beetles, sweet midge, and cabbage maggot. The sweet midge, you still need to make sure that you stay with your program for sweet midge. This will give you some protection, but you need to continue with whatever your program that you're using in addition to your Verimark. Again, it's only in furrow. It's xylem systemic, so you want to have that product right beside your seeds, so the seeds will put out at roots and it'll pick it up. Verimark does not move in the soil, so you need to make sure that it's with the seed. And the rate is 6.75 to 9 millimeters per 100 meters of row. And if you're going after cabbage maggot, it's a little bit higher, 10 to 15 per 100 meters of row. Residual control is 30 to 35 days. No pre-harvest interval for brassica, and for other root vegetables, it's 21 days. The 21 days for root crops is because that product is right beside your seed, right beside the roots, and the brassica, not so. For 60 days, previously I told you that if you use this, if you use a group 28 in furrow, that you couldn't go back to a group 28 for 60 days. In this situation, you can, because you will have the group, you will have Verimark in furrow, but you will be going back over top with different products. So products that will control your second generation of flea beetles or sweet midge, which really breaks the cycle. You're not going after the same species with the same number or the same family of group 28s. Very low risk to pollinators and beneficials, really favorable environmental profile. So if you're going with, say, if you're growing cabbage, you can probably, I think you should go with the higher rate for cabbage maggot. You're probably doing something like 15,000 plants per acre. So you want to have a high rate there. If you're going to have broccoli, you're probably going anywhere from, around 35,000 plants per acre. So you can do a little bit, you can probably go to the lower rate. If cabbage maggot is your main target insect, just make sure you go the higher rate to get some really great control. There is another way to use Verimark, and that's if you're growing plants in a greenhouse, so you can use it as a drench. So the rate is 24 to 34 mils per 1,000 plants, and that'll control your Lepidoptera, your flea beetles, and your sweet midge. Most often, growers are trying to go after cabbage maggot, so it's 35 to 54 mils per 1,000 plants for cabbage maggot. So what you do is you mix up enough to 35 to 35 mils per 1,000 plants in a certain amount of water. You put that evenly across your potted plants, and then in your trays. And then after you've done that, you put the same amount of water. So if you're using, 25 gallons, you put the Verimark on with the 25 gallons, and then immediately you go back after with 25 gallons of additional water without the Verimark. So a new registration for Verimark was for field tomatoes. And again, it's in furrow, 7 to 10 mils. It controls Colorado potato beetles. So that really is, I think, where I will stop. Oops, sorry. There's one more here that's a little bit confusing. The rate was 15 or whatever. Sorry. I'm going to go back here. So the rate is 10 to 15 milliliters of product per 100 meters of row, but that was on a 90 centimeter row. If you're going shorter rows or narrower rows, the rate is the same. The label says you can only use 1.7 liters per hectare, but that's on 90 centimeter row spacing. If you're going to be on row spacing that is, 15 centimeters or 20 centimeters, you're going to wind up using something like, 3 liters of product per hectare. And that's fine because you're staying with the original amount of product that you need per 100 millimeters of row. So up to the 15 millimeters of product per 100 meters of row, not any higher, but you will certainly use more than 1.7 liters per hectare per season. Okay, that's where I'm going to stop. So thank you very much to the team at Truro. And if there's any questions, I will try and answer them for you.
Get going then. Looks like it's 58 people online. Excellent. Good job. So thanks everyone for logging in today. It's really a pleasure for me to be able to get to do this. I'm based out of Orangeville, Ontario, so a few kilometers away from you, but I do get to the Maritimes quite often. I was there for 3 separate weeks this summer. It's always nice to see the grower base, whether it's in the valley, row crops, or wild blueberries. I'm going to touch today on some current products within our horticultural portfolio, some new products, new label amendments, and where we're going in the future. But largely, a big thanks to Truro Agromart's Terry, Mel, Chloe, the team. They put this together every year, and Rebecca, you do a great job with this. It's nice to see your connection with the grower base. So a little catch up on Adama and where we are in this crop protection space. We are focused purely on crop protection. And with that, we're bringing proven chemistries, proven active ingredients, and reformulating them for higher efficacy, more efficiently. They work faster, more consistently. And we're using highly educated, well-trained staff like Truro Agromart, to bring those products to the market space. And what's resonating well with customers of ours is that value innovation model through quality, support, simplicity, and in commodity price times like this, the price component. And we'll bring our website up to the forefront here, and stress the importance of utilizing digital and in-person resources. Truro's full of well-trained advisors, so you can use them first and foremost. But we do have a lot of support of our products available as well. I will mention a name, Drew Thompson. He's our technical sales agronomist, and he's well versed in horticultural pests and solutions and problems, far more than myself. So he's available on the website as a resource as well. What's current and new for 2025? We've identified at Adama Crop Protection that horticulture is a space where we're going to see more growth. We continue to grow in this market. Apples, wild blueberries is a place that we're continuing to invest in. And the route to market strategy for us in horticulture is to align with, you know, the retailers in the area, but then listen, learn, and deliver to the people that are, you know, closely connected to it. So whether that's Perennia, researchers out of Dalhousie, the retailers or the growers themselves, it's really about listening and learning about your market and your market challenges and delivering what's needed for that space. So as I was saying, apples continue to be a growth market for us, and horticulture and all of its you know, smaller crops within the Hort veggie space. And we'll touch on some new things, and then you know, Brevis will close this presentation out. It's our soon to be released crop load management product. I will jump into the first one here. Corsair is a new group 28 diamide insecticide that we've brought to market for this year, pronounced Corsair. This is an alternative to the market initiator, Coragen. We're bringing the same active ingredient, the chlorantinopol, CTPR for short. That's easier to say. And Coragen was the original entrant into this space. We're bringing our formulated version to market, and there will be a couple others as well. Chlorantinopol is a lepidopteran specialist. And as you see these products in the market, they have a very big label, and rightfully so. It's a soft chemistry, but it has a very long residual. The pest complex, you know, for Corsair coming into this marketplace, as I was saying, lepidopteran specialist, but across the root and tuber vegetable space, you know, armyworm, corn borer, the big heavy hitters in that space, in my experience. On your leafy greens, you know, armyworm as well, leaf miners, earworm again. This is where it'll be fitting into that space. On the fruiting vegetables, cucurbit side, corn borers again, your fruit worms, leaf miners, cutworms, and, you know, bringing products into this space as well, you know, vetting them in the field through, you know, extensive research trialing has taken place to ensure efficacy. We do have a lot of internal data to, you know, support the efficacy, and then also grower-based demonstrations and field trials. I'll quickly just touch on a couple here where we're looking at them in grasshoppers, comparing them to a market competitive. You know, it's easy for a research company to create all kinds of data sets showing you know, similarity or comparable efficacy. Our R&D is largely, we want to ensure that the products we're bringing into the market space are, you know, as good or better than the market leaders. So, you know, this one passed with flying colors. So Corsair is saleable and ready for the market this summer. And looking at the horticultural space and apples, you know, whether it's you know, small fruit and veggie plots or row crop, we've created 2 different SKU sizes so that you're not always left with part jugs, or too many empty jugs. We have the 12 by 1 liter SKU size, and that's going to be between, you know, 5 and 20 acres per jug. So very good for some of those smaller crops. And then we have a SKU size that is 2 by 6 liters, and that would be more for your orchard space or your larger potato grower or a Western bean cutworm grower in corn or soybeans. So that's Corsair, Group 28 diamide, replacing Coragen in the market space. I'll slide over to Zaveda. Zeveda is another insecticide of ours, and it follows the path of us taking proven chemistries, reformulating them to work better, have human health and environmental toxicology portfolio to them. With Zeveda, it is a lambdicide, so that's that contact pyrethroid, similar to Matador, and then our older version Silencer. What we've done with Zeveda is change the formulation for the better. So we've removed the petroleum distillates as a carrier and replaced it with a plant-based oil. And just by doing so, just by removing that petroleum, we've taken the 8-sided danger poison symbol down to a 4-sided diamond. The product still has the insecticide, so it still has the poison, of course, but just by changing the formulation, we've brought it down a whole class when it comes to human health and safety. If you've ever experienced using some of the other traditional lambdicides, you'll see a huge benefit in having that petroleum removed. And to continue on with Zeveda, the formulation improvement with plant-based oil versus the petroleum, that's where we're getting the reduction in safety labeling. Having that safety built in, you can just imagine the petroleum. It could be a flashpoint hazard. Creates challenges with storage, but it also creates that smell, volatility, and sensitization through the petroleum. Taking that out has that safety built in. We are getting the same chemistry, the same amount of active ingredient. We're still getting the quick knockdown, enhanced penetration that you'll see with the lambdicides, but you're just getting a far better product in terms of user experience. So moving across from Zeveda, we'll look at Cormoran. Cormoran's been our flagship insecticide in Eastern Canada for many years now. It's very unique in the market space. It has the 2 modes of action, the group 4 acetamiprid, and then the group 15 novaluron, and it's in an EC formulation. And how Cormoran works as an insecticide, the group 15 novaluron, it's a kitten inhibitor, so it targets the eggs, the immature insect stages, and the immatures are unable to molt. They can't mature or reproduce. Makes their eggs non-viable. And the group 4 acetamiprid, it's a nicotinic receptor modulator, affecting the sucking pest systemically and preventing them from being able to feed and eventually insect death. So where does Cormoran fit in the market space? Well, in apples, it's best known for its effectiveness on aphids and codling moth. In a program for codling moth, using Cormoran first has proven to be the best. Codling moth is one of the most economically important pests of apples. That larvae, they bore into the developing fruit, making it unmarketable. And in some areas, we're seeing 2 to 3 generations per year. Cormoran and codling moth, when we came to market many years ago, we had some pretty solid data on codling moth, and then recently there was a stigma in the marketplace about Cormoran flaring mites. So the past couple of years, Drew Thompson, our technical specialist, has really driven into that space to kind of see how it started and whether there was any truth to that, or if we could dispel that truth. I won't share all the trials that have taken place for various mites and aphids, but it was found against CTPR, Intrepid, Assail, Spearlep, Ryman, that Cormoran was the best treatment with regard to codling moth control, and we didn't flare mites or aphids above any threshold levels. If that's something you'd like to hear about more, cormorant, that codling moth space, we could work with Truro to get that information out to you. So moving from cormorant and the other insecticides, the fungicide space is where we continue to innovate, develop, and grow. We've been the original registrant in the Captan space, and we had two SKUs. We had a dry formulation that a lot of you would know in the tea bags, the 80 WDG formulation, and then we now have a liquid formulation. So the liquid formulation is a 480. There is 80 dry formulation still in the marketplace. Our path forward is going to stick with the liquid. It's just much easier for the user versus using the dry. Captan, though, it's a specialist in the marketplace on scab. You know, if you'll look at that graphic there, it's multiple application allowances have Captan being used as a Group M protectant fungicide many times throughout the year. That's well known in the space. In this space, there are a few Captan products. Outside of apples, it is being a Group M fungicide, it is labeled for a lot of different pests on a lot of different crops. Far too many to go through here in one morning. But again, it is that Group M in that protectant fungicide space. In grapes as well, it's known for downy mildew and that dead arm play. The next product of ours in the Group M fungicide space would be Fulpan. Fulpan has been getting some traction in the market space as of late. You get many applications per season. It's got a very favorable PHI and days to harvest interval timing. It's a big scab play as well. And a lot of your blotches and spots. Fulpan is a dry formulation, and we are continuing to advance our research trials to bring a liquid formulation of Fulpan to the market. The liquid formulations just ensure faster mixing, a little bit softer with bringing other things into the tank as well, and just an overall better user experience versus all those little tea bags. So Fulpan, strong resistant management tool, being that Group M, having that multi-site, and in the grape space. And I was just looking at some data here recently, but research has shown infection levels as low as 3% in grapes from downy mildew. Can have a serious impact on wine and its flavoring. So quite often grapes go into the wine space, and if you were to see, up to 30% or more downy mildew infection on the grape clusters themselves, the coloring intensity, anthocyanin rate, the tannin rate, there's lots of things that start to degrade with having that infection. So Fulpan continues to bring its value in that space where freshness and perfect fruit is the name of the game. Switching gears slightly from the Group M fungicide space to Group 29. This Group 29 being fluazanam. This is our product. It's called Vantana, and we launched it last year. And this year, we continue to get traction with it across apples, soybeans, and other fruit and veggie crops. And this is just a few months ago, we got our label expanded to include a lot of important pests in the apple space, especially. But carrots are on the label and a variety of other things. The one fluazanam chemistry is really soft, a protective broad spectrum fungicide. Group 29 really has a place in your IPM program, a resistance management tool, but it's nice and soft as well on the crop. In apples, cedar, apple rust, black rot, brook spot, quincy rust, and now we've added scab and a couple others to the label. It's more of your later season fungicide. And in addition to the label updates on Vantana, you got your cucurbits, grape, wine, carrots, field peppers. It's a very broad base label now. In this space, there is a market competitor. The market would know it as Allegro. In tradition to our value innovative model, Vantana is another one of those proven chemistries we're bringing to the market with our retail partners with a very sharp price point. And no horticultural apple presentation could be complete without touching on Brevis. Brevis is our global crop load management apple thinning product. And Drew, my coworker, especially continues to develop this. He was on a call this morning with a grower in Nova Scotia for a large scale development and demonstration trial. Brevis is going to be that product that works in conjunction with or replaces 7 XLR Maxell. And we were hoping to have this one available for sale by the demand time for this year. It doesn't look like PMRA is helping us out any, and this one looks more of a 2026 product for sale. So with that, and I will thank the Truro Agromart team, especially an awesome partner for us to team up with. We get to see how they've teamed up with growers like yourselves to truly help solve problems. Great partners of ours, as they are to you. So I'll close it out with touching on our value innovation strategy, proven chemistries, high efficacy, tested in the field, and marketed with strong retails like Truro. So thank you.
Thanks, Gavin.
Any questions?
I do see a question in the chat here, so maybe we'll start off with that. Will there be a label amendment for Captan to indicate its closed system transfer requirement? This was brought up to me from our Apple specialist. If you can find any information for me, that would be great.
Yes, so we do have on the label right now the requirements for when close transfer system is needed, and that varies between like a boom sprayer, an air blast sprayer. But I would also say there's a lot more to come in this space. So in that Group M fungicide space, chlorothalonil, Bravo Echo, and then also the Mosaic Mancozeb based products are going to see more use allowances taken away. Some may even be gone completely. So Captan Full Pan, 2 Group M fungicides that are available and labeled, and they're going to fill a lot of those use patterns. So as Captan gets expanded into horticulture or even potatoes especially, this closed loop transfer system for mixing is going to be developed rapidly. So there's more to come on that, but it is labeled currently for when and where and which application you're going to have to do that.
Very much, Rebecca. In my presentation today, I'd like to address the question, why do registered herbicides provide variable weed control? But before I begin, I'd like to just share some opening thoughts with you. I think that herbicides are incredibly valuable weed management tools, but because they're impacted by plant physiology, weather, as well as soil characteristics, the reality is weed control is variable. Frequently, the reason for less than acceptable weed control with herbicides is outside of everyone's control. However, sometimes it is human error. And I will go on to say that I think it's irresponsible for herbicide manufacturers, ag retailers, and agronomists to guarantee acceptable weed control with herbicides. And finally, I think it's unreasonable for farmers to expect perfect or acceptable weed control with herbicides in every field every year. So this is some research that we conducted on multiple herbicide-resistant Canada fleabane. This happens to be Walt McLean's farm. And sorry, and I think that if I recommended Roundup plus Aragon plus Merge to Walt McLean, I might be on his Christmas list next year. You can see the excellent weed control with Roundup plus Aragon plus Merge. In contrast to that, this is Mike Smith's farm. He farms less than 100 kilometers away from where Walt McLean farms. We have the exact same weed species. We targeted the same weed height at the time of application. It was up to 10 centimeters in diameter or 4 inches in diameter. The same research technicians sprayed both experiments. We used the same sprayer, the same water carrier volume, the same pressure, and the same nozzles, and still we get this variable weed control. So I went through all of our data that we did looking at Canada fleabane control with Roundup plus Aragon plus Merge. And you can see that we did 93 trials over about a 15-year period. And in 58% of those trials, Roundup plus Aragon plus Merge provided 90 to 100% control. Sorry about that. So it provided between 90 and 100% control. In 9% of the experiments, the control was between 80 and 89%. In 9%, it was between 70 and 79%. In 8 of the experiments, it was between 50 and 69%. And the same herbicide that provided 100% control in 5 experiments provided as little as 6% control in a different experiment. And so the question is, why? And that's the question that I hope to address in my presentation this morning. So variable weed control may be due to extremes in weather. It could be variations in soil characteristics. It could be specific weed characteristics, the incorrect application timing. There could be application issues. And finally, you may have just chosen the wrong herbicide for the weed spectrum in that specific field. So first I'll look at extremes in weather, and I'll look at 2 types of weather. It could be too little rain after a soil applied herbicide, or it could be too hot and dry after or at the time of application of a post-emergence herbicide. In terms of too little rain with a soil applied herbicide, soil applied herbicides require rainfall to dissolve the herbicide into soil water solution so that it can be taken up by the weed seedlings. And this is referred to as herbicide activation. So as a grower, when you apply a soil applied herbicide, you're counting on rain to dissolve that herbicide into soil water solution. And as the developing weed seedling takes up water to support its growth, you hope that it takes up a lethal amount of herbicide and you get excellent weed control on your farm. However, if no rainfall occurs within 7 to 10 days, weed control may be reduced with almost all soil applied herbicides. This happens to be one of my experiments. It was at the Huron Research Station, and we were evaluating Frontier for grass control in edible beans. And you can see the really disappointing control of green foxtail. I think Frontier's an excellent green foxtail herbicide, but we didn't get rain to activate the herbicide that summer, and you can see the really disappointing control. And similarly, this is Callisto applied to the soil for lamb's quarters control. And once again, really disappointing control because we didn't get an activating rain event after application. So there's multiple studies in the peer-reviewed literature to support what I just said. So in this trial or study conducted by Yamei et al. In 2016, where there was more than a half an inch of rain within 7 days after application, Zidua provided 88% control of giant foxtail. However, when the rainfall was reduced to less than a quarter of an inch, you can see the control went from 88 to 62%, or there was a 26% decrease in weed control because there was not an adequate amount of rain after application. A second reason why rain is required after the application of a soil-applied herbicide is that rain is required to move the herbicide into the soil to protect the herbicide from photodegradation and volatilization losses. And if you don't get rain, you could get reduced weed control under dry conditions with a herbicide like Prowl. Once again, I think Prowl's an excellent giant foxtail herbicide, and presumably we didn't get an activating rain event, and a portion of the herbicide was lost to breakdown by sunlight, or it turned into a gas and it volatilized off. And so once again, there's numerous studies to support that. This was some research that was done by a previous graduate student of mine, Andrea Smith. Andrea was looking at large crabgrass control and barnyard grass control with Prowl and soybean. And where there was 4 to 8/10 of an inch in the 7 days after application, you can see that Prowl provided 93% control of large crabgrass and 97% control of barnyard grass. And when the rainfall was less than 4/10 of an inch in the 7 days after application, you can see that there was a 14% decrease in the control of large crabgrass, and there was a 22% decrease in the control of barnyard grass. I do want to stress that these results are confounded by both soil characteristics and weed density. This was a field study, so these experiments were conducted on different farms in different years to get those different amounts of rainfall. So the results are confounded by soil characteristics on the farms where the studies were conducted, as well as weed density in the various fields. So one of the questions that I get is how much rain is required to activate a soil-applied herbicide. So I attend the Tuesday morning ag breakfast meetings in Ontario. 1 week they're in Ridgetown, and then the following week they're in Exeter, and then back in Ridgetown 2 weeks later. And in a dry year, people that attend the ag breakfast meetings will look at me and say, Peter, how much rain is required to activate a soil-applied herbicide? And I give them this really answer that's really not very helpful for them. And my answer is, it depends. And I'm sticking with my answer. And I think the number one factor that determines how much rain you need to activate a soil-applied herbicide are the soil moisture conditions at the time of herbicide application. If your field is at field capacity the day that you apply the herbicide, you may only need 1/4 of an inch of rain to activate that soil applied herbicide. In contrast to that, if your soil is powder dry the day that you put on your soil applied herbicide, you may need more than an inch of rainfall to activate the same herbicide. So the number one factor that determines how much rain you need to activate a soil applied herbicide is the soil moisture conditions at the time of herbicide application. It's also influenced by soil texture and organic matter. You need more rainfall to activate a herbicide on a heavy clay textured soil that's high in organic matter compared to a light sandy textured soil that's low in organic matter. And that's simply because on the heavy textured soil, high in organic matter, there's more binding sites for the herbicide. It is influenced by the herbicide group or the active ingredient. And in the research that I've done, I think that the group 15 herbicides are the first herbicides to fail in a dry year, so Dual Frontier and Zidua. And I have no side-by-side data to support what I just said, and I'm still sticking with my comment. Based on 30 years of field research, in a dry year, it's the group 15s that are the first to fail. In terms of a herbicide rate, you can weatherproof your herbicide a little bit by using the high rate on the label. And finally, it is influenced by weed species. The first weeds to escape in a dry year are the weed species that herbicide struggles on, and the weed species that it's really good on, you may still get acceptable weed control of those species in a dry year. So now we'll move on to the second type of weather, and that's too hot and dry. At the time of a post-emergence herbicide application, so during periods of drought, it is more difficult for herbicides to cross the cuticle and enter the living portion of the leaf, and the cuticle is thicker and more continuous. And in addition, under conditions of hot, dry conditions or low relative humidity, it reduces cuticle hydration or cuticle wetting, and this increases the speed of drying of spray droplets on the leaf, and the above results in reduced herbicide absorption. And you get reduced weed control with almost all post-emergence herbicides. So this is some research that was conducted by Waldecker and Weiss at University of Minnesota. They were looking at common milkweed control with glyphosate, and with adequate moisture, 44% of applied glyphosate was absorbed by the milkweed plant, and under drought conditions, that was reduced to 29%, or there was a 15% reduction in the absorption of glyphosate due to drought conditions. And similarly, in the same study, they looked at the translocation of glyphosate in milkweed. And under adequate moisture conditions, 20% of absorbed glyphosate was translocated in the plant. And under drought conditions, that was reduced to 7%, or there was a 13% decrease in the translocation of glyphosate under drought conditions. And in this study conducted by Cal Messersmith at North Dakota State University, he was looking at velvet leaf control with glyphosate under adequate moisture and drought conditions. So under adequate moisture, glyphosate provided 95% control of velvet leaf, and that was decreased to 60% control, or you could say there was a 35% decrease in the control of velvet leaf with glyphosate under drought conditions. And presumably that's because the cuticle's thicker, more continuous, and you have reduced absorption and translocation of the herbicide. Now I'll move on to variations in soil characteristics. It could be fine textured soils that's high in organic matter. Could be influenced by soil pH as well as soil tilth. So most soil applied herbicides are adsorbed to the clay and organic matter. And what you need to realize is that if a herbicide is adsorbed to the soil, it is biologically unavailable for weed control. And so the herbicide rate should be adjusted depending on soil type and organic matter content. And you have reduced weed control with herbicides that are tightly adsorbed to clay and organic matter. And the herbicide manufacturers are aware of that. And on the broad strike label, it says do not apply to soils with greater than 5% organic matter. That's a pretty restrictive statement on the label. I grew up on a dairy and hog farm in central Ontario, and my brother and nephew still have the farm. Every single one of their fields has greater than 6% or organic matter. They have alfalfa in the rotation. They have lots of manure from their dairy herd, and all of their fields have greater than 5% organic matter. And so my brother and nephew, if they followed the label, they could not use broad strike for broadleaf weed control in their corn and soybean. The authority and Zidua labels say that you should not apply it to soils with greater than 6% organic matter, and the Treflan label says you shouldn't apply it to soils with greater than 10% organic matter. So this is some data that I got from FMC. And in this research, they were looking at velvet leaf control with sulfentrazone or authority. So authority provided 87% control of velvet leaf on a coarse textured soil. On a medium textured soil, you can see the control was decreased to 80%. Or there was a 7% decrease in control, and that control was decreased even further to 58% on a fine textured soil, or there was a 29% decrease in weed control. And the reason why there's poor weed control on these fine textured soils is that a greater amount of the herbicide is adsorbed to the soil and it's not available for weed control. So in terms of soil pH, for some soil applied herbicides, soil pH affects the ionization properties of the herbicide, and some herbicides protonate and deprotonate depending on the soil pH. I fully appreciate that not all of you remember your high school chemistry courses, but for a herbicide, or when a herbicide protonate, it just means that it accepts a hydrogen atom, and when it deprotonate, it releases a hydrogen atom. A hydrogen atom has a positive charge, so if it accepts a hydrogen, the herbicide becomes positively charged or more positively charged, and if it releases that hydrogen atom, it becomes negatively charged in the soil, as you can see here. And that's affected by soil pH. So the soil has a negative charge. And so if you have a positively charged herbicide, as you would at this lower soil pH, the herbicide is bound to the soil and it's biologically unavailable for weed control. In contrast to that, as soil pH, the herbicide may release that hydrogen atom. It now becomes negatively charged. You have negatively charged soil, you have a negatively charged herbicide, they repel each other. The herbicide stays in soil water solution, and the developing weed seedling can take it up. And the best example we have in Ontario of that is with Sencor. So at low soil pH, Sencor forms cations in the soil, which are more tightly adsorbed to the negatively charged soil, which results in reduced weed control. So the best study that I could find in showing the impact of soil pH on herbicide activity was a study that was conducted by Brian Jinks and George Kagodi at North Dakota State University. They were looking at biennial wormwood control, and they noticed really variable results in their research. and they did intensive soil sampling, and they could correlate the control of biennial wormwood with broadstrike based on soil pH. So at a high soil pH, presumably broadstrike is negatively charged in the soil. It released that hydrogen atom. It's now repelled by the soil colloids. It stays in soil water solution, and the biennial wormwood can take it up. And they had 100% control where the pH was 7.8. Really interesting. You can see that there was a decrease in control when the pH was reduced to 6.5, and there was a 15% decrease in the control of biennial wormwood. And I think it's fascinating that these scientists could make these correlations on a low pH soil. Presumably broadstrike accepted that proton. It's now positively charged. It's bound to the soil. It's biologically unavailable for the biennial wormwood to take it up. And there is a 55% decrease in control just based on soil pH. In terms of soil tilth, large clods may result in reduced weed control, and large clods prevent even herbicide application, and seeds can germinate and emerge from below that large clod, and that weed seedling will not be exposed to any of the herbicide. And if there are too many large clods in the field should be tilled prior to application. Now we'll look at weed specifics, and we'll look at cuticle composition on a number of different weed species, the impact of weed density, the impact of time of germination and emergence, and finally, we'll look at the effect of single compared to multiple herbicide resistance. So in terms of the differences in cuticle, the cuticle varies in composition and thickness among weed species, and it changes during the growing season. So generally, younger plants have thinner and less developed cuticles, and thinner cuticles are more permeable to herbicides, which results in greater herbicide absorption, and it results in improved weed control efficacy with almost all post-emergence herbicides. So here's some fascinating research conducted by this range of different weed scientists, and they were looking at the amount of epicuticular wax per square centimeter on the leaf surface of these 5 different weed species. And notice that there was 10 micrograms per square meter in velvet leaf, and there was 278 micrograms, per square meter in lamb's quarters. I simply didn't realize that there's a 28-fold difference in the epicuticular wax between velvet leaf and lamb's quarters. And presumably, that's one of the reasons why lamb's quarters can be difficult to control post-emergence if you have weed escapes in your corn and soybean. The second thing in terms of weeds that I'll present is the impact of weed density. This was some research that was conducted by Christian Wilms while he was a graduate student in my program. He was looking at water hemp control with Prime Extra, and where there were less than 70 plants per square meter, Prime Extra provided 98% control, or there was 1 weed escape per square meter. That's probably still not commercially acceptable, but that's pretty good weed control with that herbicide. In contrast to that, in fields that, that had greater than 700 plants per square meter, notice that the control decreased from 98 to 79%. So there was a 19% decrease in weed control, and that resulted in 147 weed escapes per square meter, and that definitely would not be commercially acceptable. I want to stress again that these experiments were done on different farms in southwestern Ontario, and therefore the results that I'm presenting are confounded by different amounts of rainfall where these experiments were conducted. There was different soil characteristics on those farms, and the water hemp biotype may have been different on the different farms where this research was conducted. Regardless, there was a dramatic impact of weed density on herbicide efficacy. And the impact of weed density on herbicide efficacy is not new. These authors published this manuscript in 1978, so almost 50 years ago, and they said, in fields with extremely heavy weed pressure, control may not be commercially acceptable. And some herbicide labels recommend that you increase the rate of the herbicide if you have heavy weed pressure on your farm. And so the dual label has this statement on the label. It says, use the higher rate for heavier weed problems. The atrazine label says, use higher rate for heavy weed infestations. And the Shieldex label says, use of the higher rate for heavy weed infestations is recommended. So I think that every herbicide label should have a statement on the label indicating that weed control efficacy is influenced by weed density. And I would suggest to you that every farmer knows that. So if a farmer was considering using a below label rate on his farm, I can almost assure you he would not use that below label rate in fields with really heavy weed pressure. If he was going to try to save money on his herbicide and use a below label rate, he would probably do it in the fields with lower weed pressure. Farmers know that herbicide efficacy is influenced by weed density, and I think every herbicide label should have a statement on the label informing growers that herbicide efficacy is influenced by weed density. The weed control with herbicide is going to be influenced by time of germination and emergence of the weed species. So some weed species germinate late in the spring or early summer, or they germinate and emerge over an extended period of time. So this was some really interesting research that Mike Shriver did while he was a graduate student in my program. What we asked Mike to do is he set up permanent quadrats on a farm in southwestern Ontario. And every Monday morning, it was his job to go to that farm, count how many water hemp plants emerged in the previous 7 days. Then he would spray that area off with Liberty, and he would go back the following Monday morning and count how many came up in the previous 7 days. So make sure you note that this is a logarithmic scale. And so in the 7 days prior to June 1, about 400 water hemp plants came up per square meter. Mike would have controlled those with an application of Liberty. He came back on June 7, and you can see about 300 water hemp plants came up per square meter. In the 7 days prior to June 14, about 500 plants came up per square meter. What's absolutely amazing to me, on August 27, presumably we had a rain event and we had another flush of water hemp, and there were still 100 water hemp plants coming up per square meter. And notice in the research that Mike did, water hemp is still coming up on October 25 in Ontario. So if you have a weed species with a germination and emergence pattern like that, that's going to impact your weed control program, and you're going to have to apply a herbicide that provides long residual weed control through the summer and probably you're going to have to rely on a 2-pass weed control program of a soil-applied herbicide and then follow it up with a post-emergence herbicide to control any weed escapes. So in terms of time of germination and emergence, herbicide concentration is reduced due to photo, chemical, and microbial degradation beginning immediately after application. So if you apply a herbicide on Monday morning, on Tuesday morning, there's less herbicide in the field, right? So as soon as you apply a herbicide, it is going to be broken down by photo, or you could say broken down by sunlight, by chemical, as well as microbial degradation. And that continues every day throughout the summer. There's going to be less herbicide on a daily basis. And that's actually good because that means the herbicide degrades and you can plant any crop you want, hopefully the following summer. But as the herbicide degrades in the soil, there may no longer be a lethal concentration in the soil to control those late emerging weeds. So you get reduced control of late emerging weeds. And I will give you the example of water hemp and velvet leaf control with the dicamba-based herbicides like Ingenia and Extendamax, or eastern black nightshade and fall panic control with the group 15 herbicides like Dual, Frontier, and Zidua. I got these really interesting pictures from a colleague of mine. His name's Dr. Joe Eichley. Joe works at North Dakota State University. He took this picture of a water hemp plant. This water hemp plant emerged on September 1, so obviously he took note of it and must have put a stake out in the field beside it. What's absolutely fascinating to me, this plant germinated and emerged on September 1, and by September 25, so 3.5 weeks later, this plant had produced viable weed seeds that would contribute to the weed seed bank and impact your weed control program in future years. So weeds are amazing plants. All plants are amazing. They sense their environment. So this plant came up on September 1. That plant sensed that there was declining day length, and it switched from vegetative to reproductive growth really early, and it produced viable seeds within 3.5 weeks from emerging from the soil. So now I'll address the topic of single versus multiple herbicide resistance. And the example I'll use is multiple herbicide resistant Canada fleabane. This happens to be Tom Hebblethwaite's farm. He does have glyphosate resistant Canada fleabane. And we applied a tank mix of Roundup plus Broadstrike. And you can notice that we had perfect control of the glyphosate resistant Canada fleabane on his farm. This is the density of Canada fleabane where no herbicide was applied. This happens to be Chris Steele's farm. Chris Steele farms only 15 kilometers from where Tom Hebblethwaite farms. We applied the exact same herbicide on Chris Steele's farm, and you can see it's a complete failure. So the question is, why did we get such good weed control on Tom Hebblethwaite's farm and such poor control on Chris Steele? Tom Hebblethwaite is the lucky farmer. His water hemp is just glyphosate resistant, and the group 2 herbicide Broadstrike controls that biotype. And in contrast, Chris Steele is the unlucky farmer. The biotype of Canada fleabane on his farm is both group 2 and group 9 resistant. Glyphosate is a group 9 herbicide, Broadstrike's a group 2 herbicide, and both of those herbicides fail on his farm. Now I'll address the topic of the mechanism of resistance. This happens to be water hemp on Doug Nelson's farm. And we applied atrazine for weed control in corn, and you can see it completely failed. And that didn't surprise me. We knew that there was group 5 resistant water hemp on Doug Nelson's farm. Atrazine's a group 5 herbicide, so you would expect that it wouldn't provide any control. What absolutely amazed me is that 100 meters away, we did an experiment in soybean. Sencor is a group 5 herbicide, so is atrazine, and Sencor provides perfect control of a group 5 resistant water hemp plant. And so the question is why? And the reason is it all comes down to the chemical structure of the herbicide. And I rarely show the chemical structure of herbicides at a grower meeting, but this is really interesting. So the reason why atrazine does not provide control of group 5 resistant water hemp is there's a chlorine at the #1 position on that 6-member ring. And the chlorine atom provides a binding site for a specific enzyme. It's called glutathione S-transferase. And that enzyme conjugates atrazine to glutathione, which is just a 3-amino acid polypeptide. And that conjugated herbicide is recognized by ABC transporters, and it dumps this herbicide into the vacuole. The herbicide does not get to the chloroplast at a lethal dose, and you have a resistant biotype on the farm. But the reason why Sencor still works, Sencor does not have a chlorine at the #1 position. It has an oxygen at the #1 position. That oxygen does not provide a binding site for the enzyme glutathione S-transferase, so metribuzin remains in the active form. It's taken up by the developing weed seedling. It stops electron transport in the plant, and the weeds die. Absolutely amazing. And I am just fascinated by the intersection between chemistry and biology and how it impacts weed management on the farm. Now we'll talk about application timing. You could apply a pre-plant herbicide too early. You could apply a soil-applied herbicide too late, or you could apply a post-emergence herbicide too late. So in terms of applying pre-plant herbicides too early pre-plant applications, for example, on April 15, compared to early post-emergence applications on June 16 and no-till, provide lower weed control in mid-August because the pre-plant herbicide has been degraded more. So as I mentioned, if you apply a herbicide to the soil on Monday, there's less herbicide on Tuesday, and it decreases on a daily basis throughout the growing season. So if you're looking at weed control in mid-August, the early pre-plant application has been on for 4 months compared to if you put on a post-emergence application of the same herbicide, let's say atrazine, on June 15, it's only been on 2 months. So there's more herbicide left when you apply it early post-emergence compared to early pre-plant. So you would have reduced late season weed control in both no-till corn and soybean with early applications of soil-applied residual herbicides. In terms of applying a soil-applied herbicide too late, this is some research that was conducted by Jim Kells at Michigan State University. He applied dual for giant foxtail control pre-emergence, and you can see the control was 100%. He applied it at the 2-leaf stage of corn, and the control was 99%. And notice where he delayed the application up to the 4-leaf stage of corn, the control was reduced to 80%, or there was a 20% reduction in the weed control because he applied dual too late. And so that's not surprising. So soil-applied herbicides applied after the weeds have emerged. If you look at the dual label, and it would be Frontier or Zidua as well, you can apply them post-emergence in corn. It's safe to apply them post in corn, but when I teach the weed science course at Ridgetown campus, I always tell my students, if you can see those annual grasses with the human eye, you better spray that day because the weed control declines really rapidly. And you get reduced weed control with late application of herbicides such as Dual, Frontier, Zidua, as well as Prowl. In terms of too late with post-emergence herbicides, generally, annual weeds are easier to control when they're young and actively growing. And the reason is the cuticle is thinner and it's more permeable, so you get greater uptake of the herbicide, and the plant is growing actively, and the herbicide has a greater effect. So you have reduced control of large weeds with almost all post-emergence herbicides, including the group 1 herbicides, so grass control with Assure, Post, Select, and Venture. The post-emergence contact broadleaf herbicides like Basgran, Blazer, Pardner, and Reflex. The group 27 herbicides like Armazon, Callisto, Lotus, and Shieldex, as well as glyphosate and Liberty. Just to illustrate the point, this is some research that was done by Brendan Metzger while he was a graduate student in my program. He was looking at ladies' thumb control with Shieldex plus atrazine. Here you can see the control was 93% when the herbicide was applied when the lady's thumb was up to 4 inches in height. Notice where it was 8 inches in height, there was a decrease in control of 19%, and where the weeds were up to 12 inches in height, there was a decrease in weed control of 43%. So if you forget everything from my presentation today, always remember that herbicide efficacy is influenced by the size of the weeds at the time of application. If you're going to make a mistake as a grower, always make the mistake of applying the herbicide too early rather than too late. You get better weed control if you apply early than if you apply it late. And if you do apply it late, there's a longer period of weed interference, and it's going to result in reduced yield of your corn as well as your soybean. So the herbicide manufacturers are aware of that. And here you can see a picture of poor lamb's quarters control with Reflex. And it says on the Reflex label, apply Reflex when weeds are small and actively growing. And the label goes on to say later applications may result in poor weed control due to advanced weed growth. And that is true for essentially every single post-emergence herbicide. You will get better weed control if you apply when the weeds are small, young, and actively growing. Now we'll look at application issues. First of all, I'll talk about herbicide antagonism, the impact of herbicide rate, failure to add the correct tank mix partner, adjuvant selection, as well as time of day. So tank mixes with some herbicides and foliar fertilizers will result in reduced weed control. There are lots of different examples of antagonism with herbicide tank mixtures, and there's lots of examples of foliar fertilizers antagonizing the efficacy of post-emergence herbicides. So Basagran antagonizes annual grass control with herbicides like Post and Select. Classic and First Rate antagonize yellow foxtail control with Assure. Clay-based herbicide formulations antagonize the activity of glyphosate, and some, not all, some foliar fertilizers will antagonize glyphosate. So this happens to be some research that was conducted by Clarence Swanton at the University of Guelph. Clarence applied Assure plus Pinnacle, and you can see there was no antagonism, and there was 94% control of barnyard grass. However, where Clarence tank mixed Assure plus Classic, the control of barnyard grass was reduced to 78%. So there was a 16% decrease in control, or you could say antagonism. And there was even greater antagonism when Assure was tank mixed with first rate, and there was a 46% decrease in the control of barnyard grass. Just to show you the impact of antagonism in the field, in this research, Clarence applied Classic plus Pinnacle plus Assure as a three-way tank mix, and you can see the really disappointing annual grass control. Right beside it, he applied the same three herbicides, but in this treatment, he applied Classic plus Pinnacle 1 week. He waited 7 days, and then he applied Assure. There was no antagonism from the Classic, and notice the dramatic improvement in weed control by not applying a tank mix of Assure and Classic. This is some research that we did at the Huron Research Station looking at the impact of some foliar fertilizers, I should say a specific foliar fertilizer, on weed control efficacy with glyphosate. So where glyphosate was applied by itself, you can see that it provided 76 to 100% control of these 4 weed species: lamb's quarters, wild mustard, green smartweed, and common ragweed. Really interesting to me with this specific foliar fertilizer, and the foliar fertilizer company asked me to do this research. I sure didn't think of it myself. And notice that there was a decrease in the control of all 4 weed species when you combine the foliar fertilizer with glyphosate. So there was a 6% decrease in the control of smartweed. There was a 13% decrease in the control of wild mustard, a 33% decrease in the control of common ragweed, and a 58% decrease in the control of lamb's quarters by adding a foliar fertilizer to glyphosate. So we took that experiment to yield. Where glyphosate was applied by itself, the corn yield was 171 bushels per acre. Keep in mind, you spend money on the foliar fertilizer to increase the yield of your corn. And you can see that there was a 48 bushel per acre yield loss by adding the foliar fertilizer to glyphosate because of herbicide antagonism. The herbicide rate should be adjusted depending on soil characteristics. So you would use a higher rate on fine textured soils that are high in organic matter. It should be adjusted depending on application timing. So if you're going to apply early pre-plant, you may want to increase the rate of your soil applied herbicide, and you should adjust the rate depending on weed species. And I'll use the example that you would increase the rate for difficult to control species, and you would use the high rate on the atrazine and Sencor label for common ragweed control, and you would increase glyphosate rate based on the weed species and weed height at the time of application. So this is some research that I did with a colleague of mine, Dr. Rob Nurse at the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada Research Station in Harrow. This is a different kind of bar graph. So what we're looking at here is what rate of Roundup do you need in liters per acre to get 90% control of these 5 different weed species. I put a blue line at 1 liter per acre. I think that this is the most frequent rate that's used in Ontario. It used to be 0.67 liters per acre, and I think there's been a creep in the rate that farmers are using. And today, I think most farmers apply Roundup Weather Max at 1 liter per acre. Really interesting to me, if you have a 30 centimeter or 12-inch green foxtail barnyard grass or redroot pigweed, our data says that you will get 90% control or if you apply glyphosate at 1 liter per acre, right? Our data says you need 0.5, 0.7, and 0.6 liters per acre to get 90% control of those 3 weed species. Notice you need twice as much Roundup to kill a 12-inch lamb's quarters than a red root pigweed, and you need 5 times as much Roundup to kill a 12-inch common ragweed plant compared to a green foxtail. So farmers need to know what weed species they have in each individual field, and you need to adjust the rate of the herbicide based on the weed species composition in each individual field. And then we looked at the impact of weed height on the amount of Roundup you need to control lamb's quarters. So if lamb's quarters is up to 4 inches in height, our data says you need 0.46 liters per acre to get 90% control. If the lamb's quarters is 8 inches in height, you need 0.67 liters per acre to get 90% control. And if the lamb's quarters is 12 inches in height, you need 1.28 liters per acre to get 90% control, or you need 3 times as much Roundup to kill a 12-inch lamb's quarters as a 4-inch lamb's quarters. So now I'll go on to the interaction between herbicide and modes of action. So this is some research that was conducted by John Fluttert. Well, he was a graduate student in my program. Shieldex provided 34% control of Canada fleabane, atrazine 79, and you combine the two and you get 94% control. And there was a synergistic increase in the control of Canada fleabane by tank mixing Shieldex plus atrazine. And this is what it looked like in the field. Here's the weedy control. This is the density of Canada fleabane on some farms in southwestern Ontario. Atrazine by itself didn't provide acceptable control. Same with Shieldex. And notice the excellent control by tank mixing those 2 herbicides. And you can get the same response by adding another reactive oxygen species generating herbicide like partner. And John did some additional work. Once again, here he's looking at the control of common ragweed and green foxtail with Callisto and Liberty. Notice Callisto by itself provided 51 and 5% control. Liberty was 68 and 78. And you combine them and you get this synergistic increase in control with the tank mix of those 2 herbicides. In terms of adjuvant selection, the activity of many post-herbicides is reduced dramatically when applied with the wrong adjuvant. So this is research once again conducted by John Fluttert. Here he is looking at weed control with Shieldex plus atrazine. Here there's common ragweed, velvet leaf, and lamb's quarters control with Shieldex and no adjuvant, and that is really disappointing control. John added Agrol 90 and the control improved to 64 to 95%. And you can see with the addition of merge, the control increased to 91 to 98% control. So there was a 68% increase in the control of common ragweed by adding the correct adjuvant. There was a 42% increase in the control of velvet leaf and a 48% control increase in the control of lamb's quarters. So not only do you have to add an adjuvant to post-emergence herbicides, you have to add a specific adjuvant. Not all adjuvants are the same. And in John's research, the best adjuvant to add to Shieldex plus atrazine was merge. Just to show you what it looked like in the field, here's the weedy control. This is Shieldex plus atrazine with no adjuvant. And this is the impact of spending $3 to $4 on an adjuvant. And you go from this to this. I say read the product label and use the adjuvant that is on the label. The time of day has been documented to affect the activity of some herbicides on some weed species, and research indicates that weed control with many post-emergence herbicides is reduced when sprayed very early in the morning or very late at night. So this is weed control with Liberty, and we're looking at a combination of velvet leaf ragweed, lamb's quarters, barnyard, and green foxtail control. The herbicide was applied at 6 o'clock in the morning, 9 in the morning, noon, 3 in the afternoon, 6 p.m., 9 p.m., and midnight. And notice you get the best weed control when it's sprayed between noon and 6 p.m. And there was a 32% decrease in weed control when you compared the application at midnight compared to the application at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So here you can see what it looked like in the field. Notice in the weedy check, we have high weed density. You can't even see the ground between the corn rows. Here at 12 noon, 3 p.m., and 6 p.m., there's near perfect control of all the weed species in that experiment. However, when you look at the control at 6 in the morning, once again, you can see a carpet of weeds between the corn rows, and it's the same thing where it was applied at midnight and not quite as bad where it was applied at 9 p.m. We did take those trials to yield, and you can see that the yield response follows the weed control. And there was a 48 bushel per acre yield loss by spraying Liberty at midnight compared to 12 noon. So adjust your herbicide application timing during the day based on the herbicide. Our data shows that the post-contact herbicides, things like Liberty, Partner, Basagran, Reflex, Blazer, they have the greatest time of day effect. And if you want to get the best weed control with post-contact herbicides, those herbicides should be applied during the warmest sunlit hours of the day. And in contrast to that, systemic herbicides, things like Roundup or the Group 1 herbicides, Assure, the Group 4 herbicides, 2,4-D and dicamba, they're not affected to the same degree by time of day, and you'll get almost the same weed control when they're sprayed early in the morning, late at night, as if they're sprayed during the warmest sunlit hours of the day. And to wrap up my presentation, I'll just make a couple comments about herbicide choice. Each herbicide has its strengths and weaknesses, and weed management practitioners must match the herbicide selected to the weed spectrum in each individual field. And so in the next few slides, I'll just show you pictures where the wrong herbicide was chosen for the weed spectrum in that field. So here you can see weed escapes with Sencor. Notice the velvet leaf escapes with Sencor on the left-hand side and the common ragweed escapes on the right-hand side. I don't want anybody to think that I think that Sencor is not a good herbicide. As a matter of fact, the use of Sencor is really increasing in the province of Ontario, mostly for the control of glyphosate-resistant weeds. But if you have velvet leaf on the farm or common ragweed, a different soil-applied herbicide should be chosen to get effective control of those weed species. This is lamb's quarters escapes with first rate. Notice the excellent control of wild mustard with first rate, but it's not very good on lamb's quarters. Lamb's quarters doesn't appear on the first rate label applied post-emergence. And if you do have lamb's quarters escapes in identity preserved soybean, probably a herbicide like Pinnacle would be a better choice than a herbicide like first rate. Here's Eastern Black Nightshade escapes with Pinnacle in soybean. Once again, Eastern Black Nightshade does not appear on the Pinnacle label. And if you have Eastern Black Nightshade escapes in your identity preserved soybean, a herbicide like Reflex is going to give you better control than Pinnacle. So to wrap up my lecture, I just have a few summary thoughts. The reality is weed control with herbicides is variable for all the reasons that I went through in my presentation this morning. I will repeat what I said at the beginning of my lecture, and that is that I think it's irresponsible for herbicide manufacturers, ag retailers, and agronomists to guarantee acceptable weed control with herbicides. And I think it's unreasonable or unfair for farmers to expect perfect weed control with herbicides in every field every year. I will go on to say, though, that even though weed management with herbicides is variable, they are incredible weed management tools, and the return on investment on weed management with herbicides is tremendous. So thank you very much. I noticed that it's exactly 12 noon, or for you, it's 11 o'clock for me. I am more than happy to try to address any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Peter. There are a couple questions in the chat. So
Sure.
I'll kick it off with those. So the first one is, Dr. Sikkema, if low rainfall improves herbicide effectiveness, could it also increase the risk of crop damage?
So if low rainfall is going to, I'll make the assumption, and if I'm not answering the question correctly, so low rainfall reduces the activity of a herbicide because it's not dissolved in soil water solution, so you get poorer weed control. And if you're going to get poorer weed control, in all likelihood, you would get less crop injury. So they kind of go in parallel. If you get reduced weed control, you get reduced crop injury. If you have greater weed control, chances are you might get greater crop injury as well.
The next one, when it's too dry after application in horticulture, should we irrigate for activation with traveling guns to activate a herbicide, or does this cause too much soil movement and decrease weed control?
I would say if you have the capability of irrigating and you've put on a soil applied herbicide, I would definitely put on some water. And I'm thinking you would put on a 1/2 to 1 inch of water. I think if you put on that amount of water, it's not going to move the herbicide laterally very much at all. And you're going to get better weed control. So if you have that capability, you're the lucky farmer, and definitely put on some irrigation water in dry springs.
Okay, I do have a couple other ones in the chat. Does anyone want to unmute to ask a question, or I'll just keep going with the chat if nobody else wants to pop in?
I
Okay.
enjoy the questions, so fire away.
Okay, so if weed control is most effective between 12 and 5 p.m., at what temperatures do you get cautious with application? Do you have a simple rule to follow with temperature during application?
So really good question. And I'm repeating what I just said a minute ago. With post-contact herbicides, you get the best weed control when they're sprayed during the warmest sunlit hours of the day. But as the question implies, so good question, you also have the greatest chance for crop injury. And when I have that conversation with a grower, I tell them that you're going to get the best weed control, but you could potentially get more crop injury. And then it's the choice of the grower, right? If he wants to maximize weed control, spray between 12 and 6. If your weed pressure isn't very heavy, if the weeds are still small at the time of application, if you've had good growing conditions in the previous 7 days, You might delay that application till 6 o'clock at night or just after supper time. You know that you're going to give up some weed control, but if those weeds are soft and succulent, hopefully it's still acceptable, and you will gain in crop safety. And so that's a decision that only the farmer can make. I can tell them, what the trends would be. And then the farmer has to decide whether crop safety is more important or if better weed control is more important. And that will determine what time he sprays during the day.
Okay. Next one. Does all foliar fertilizer affect glyphosate effectiveness? Reason for asking is some promote using liquid manganese to lessen the effects of glyphosate on Roundup Ready corn or soybeans.
So to answer the question, not every foliar fertilizer is the same. And we definitely have done research where we have specific foliar fertilizer blends where there's no antagonism at all. So as a grower, if you want to use a foliar fertilizer with glyphosate, make sure that you talk to your people at your ag retail point and make sure that they have data to show that that specific foliar fertilizer blend does not antagonize glyphosate. In terms of safening glyphosate by adding a foliar fertilizer, I would definitely not make that recommendation. If you think of Roundup Ready corn and Roundup Ready soybean, the transgene that's been incorporated into Roundup Ready corn and Roundup Ready soybean confers a really high level of crop tolerance or crop resistance, and there's no need to add a foliar fertilizer that antagonizes the weed control and also in theory would antagonize any potential crop injury. In the trials that we've done, I've only seen noticeable crop injury from glyphosate on Roundup Ready corn, Roundup Ready soybean, where we've applied it, let's say, at 4 times the label rate, which no farmer would do, and we apply it, outside of the application window. So with the new Roundup Ready hybrids, the new soybean cultivars, there's a really wide margin of crop safety to glyphosate applied post-emergence. And in fairness to the person asking the question, the earlier resistance events did not provide the same level of resistance that the current resistance events in current Roundup Ready corn hybrids and soybean cultivars. And so you can't extrapolate from the yellow flash that you saw in soybean, let's say, shortly after the introduction of Roundup Ready soybean, or the breakdown of leaf tissue in corn, because the current hybrids and cultivars just have a much higher level of resistance to the herbicide.
Perfect, thank you. One more just popped in here. Do you recommend using products such as LI 700 with glyphosate?
The simple answer is no. We looked at 10 different adjuvants with current glyphosate formulations in Canada. In Canada, the market has drifted to products that are considered to be fully loaded glyphosate formulations. Fully loaded just means they have a really aggressive adjuvant system in the formulation, and there is no need to add an additional adjuvant to the current formulations that are sold in Canada. I think if you as a grower are willing to spend $2 on LI 700, I would tell you just increase your rate of Roundup Weather Max by $2 an acre. You will get better value for your money by increasing the rate of Roundup by the what the corresponding cost was for the adjuvant than by tank mixing Roundup plus the adjuvant.
Okay. Any other questions?
Can we ask one in verbally, Rebecca?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Scott.
Hi, Peter.
How are you, Scott?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, really well.
Yeah, very interesting presentation. And one of the things that caught my eye that I had not heard of before, Peter, was the synergism between Callisto and Liberty. So phosphonate there. So I'm just wondering if you can comment on any thoughts on the underlying mechanism or reason for that, and then how might that synergism translate to applying Callisto post-emergence on a perennial weed like, say, goldenrod or something.
So you get really detailed here, Scott. So I will apologize if I get too detailed. But the group 27 herbicides reduce the production of homogentisate in the plant, which is a precursor for the formation of tocopherols, plastoquinone, and carotenoids. All three of those all three of those are antioxidants in the plant that quench reactive oxygen species. So just think, Callisto reduces the ability of the plant to quench reactive oxygen species that break cell membranes. When you apply Liberty, it causes a massive increase in the production of reactive oxygen species in the plant. So if you can see my hands, so Liberty increases reactive oxygen species in the plant. And then if you apply Callisto, it reduces the ability of the plant to quench reactive oxygen species. And you get a situation where 1 + 1 = 5, right? And that's why you have that synergistic response when you tank mix those two. And so in terms of a perennial weed, I think you would get better contact activity. You would get accentuated leaf burn, but I'm not convinced that you're going to get sufficient translocation in the plant to get control the following year. So you'll really burn it back, but I don't think it's going to be good enough for control in subsequent
Yeah,
years.
that's what I was curious. So it'd be that synergism would be most beneficial on sort of a annual weeds, susceptible annual weeds, most likely.
Yep. And you are correct. And you'll get accentuated burn on the biannual, winter annuals, and perennials, but
Yep. Yep.
they won't, you won't get control the following year.
Okay. No, you just got an idea burning in my head now. I'm gonna, thanks, Peter.
Oh, you're most welcome.
So we are it's about quarter after 12 now. So we have a break scheduled until 1 o'clock when our next speaker will come in. If there are any other questions for Peter, if anyone wants to just send those our way, and we can certainly reach out to Peter and address those for you. I want to thank you again, Peter, for taking the time today. And as well, thank you to our suppliers that have been joining us the last couple of days, have all sponsored this event, which has largely made it possible for us to have Peter with us today. So we appreciate that. Appreciate everyone's questions and conversation. I'm sure Scott and Peter could talk the rest of the day, but we will take our break now, and we'll be starting up again at 1 o'clock. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for the invitation to speak. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Your day.
Yep, bye.